So, hi, welcome back to another quick coffee moment. It's interesting. I thought I'd just actually address the kind of issue of the history of coffee with radical thinking, which there is one. If you go back to 1511 in Mecca, the Imams there outlawed coffee, which they saw associated with too much radical thinking, which they didn't like. You see, so there's a tendency in me to say, "Hey, vive la revolution," but unfortunately, it's not just. It wasn't just in Islam that coffee was banned. The Catholic Church also had some exceptions they took, which they saw coffee encouraging bad behaviour. So a group of Italian clergy, about 50 years or so after that ban in Mecca, they actually went around saying coffee was satanic and it shouldn't be drunk and put a local ban on drinking it. But that never really caught on in Italy, not surprising, because down in Rome, the Pope, who I think was Clement VII at the time, he was a great coffee fan. And so he resolved that situation of people being discouraged from drinking it by actually baptising coffee into the Christian church. so if I was Catholic, this would be a sanctified drink. Of course, the story didn't stop there. So that's all 16th century. You kind of roll on into the Reformation, and the northern European towns and cities, they break away from the Catholic Church, so they can do what they like. And you kind of get those different approaches. So in Holland, of course, they got really into coffee, whereas in Sweden, they likewise looked at it and said, it seems to be associated with radicals and people who think too deeply. We better ban it. So Sweden actually banned the drinking of coffee, and not only the drinking of coffee, but all the paraphernalia that go with it. So little cups, coffee cups, and coffee brewing equipment all got banned in Sweden. It didn't really last though, and we kind of move into the 20th century. Strangely, there is still war with coffee, but it's not war with coffee as a product. It's more that we use coffee itself. It's a major element actually in trade wars. So it was only last year, for instance, that a 25% trade tariff that was imposed on German exported coffee to the US was removed as part of their trade war over the subsidies that Germany gives the European Airbus project. So anyway, lots of conflict, but a heavenly and very Christian drink, I have to say. Good. Well, let's just enjoy it. Anyway, my thought for today is, without wanting to be too controversial, but let's be a little bit radical, since coffee is such a radical drink. Have you ever noticed how God asks people to do stuff and then almost immediately tells them he's not really interested in it? Maybe not, but I can never help missing the fact that almost a major theme of the Old Testament is God telling the children of Israel he wasn't really interested in sacrifices and offerings. And you think, well, what happened? We came out of Egypt, we went there in Sinai, we got the Ten Commandments, God spoke to us, most amazing event, and God told us to do sacrifices. And then almost straight away he's saying, yeah, but you know what, I'm not really interested in sacrifices and offerings. And obviously I can't fully address the full theological implications of that this morning, and I don't want to upset anybody. But I spotted something the first time I've seen it, which I thought actually helps resolve that strange thing. I think there are ways of resolving it, and as is always the way in theology, sometimes those things that don't seem to make sense actually are the things that lead you into the deepest revelations. And so I've kind of addressed this issue for myself for a while, but I came across this verse in Jeremiah, which I think kind of captures it a little bit. So Jeremiah 22, because I didn't speak to your fathers or command them in the day that I brought them out of the land of Egypt concerning burnt offerings and sacrifices. What? Here's Jeremiah saying God didn't. Hang on, I've read the story. He did. Well, no, actually he didn't. Not straight away. Okay, he does talk to them, but it's not straight away. So I didn't on the day I brought you out. I wasn't talking about those things. So there's something that precedes the command about sacrifices and offerings. And then he goes on and says, where are we? But this is what I commanded them, saying, obey my voice, and I'll be your God, and you will be my people, and you will walk in the ways which I command you, and that it may be well with you. But you didn't incline your ear, but you walked in your own counsel and the stubbornness of your own heart, and you went backwards, not forwards. So there's an interesting tension here in this verse in Jeremiah. What he's saying is, God is with them, and the intertestamental rabbis, the rabbis that lived between the finishing of the Old Testament before Jesus comes, had identified this phrase, the voice of God, my voice. You didn't obey my voice, as being like the word of God, Dabah Yahweh, and like the wisdom of God in Proverbs, and like the angel of the Lord, who sometimes seems to be the Lord, is that when God is interacting with humanity, he does so through this thing called the word, the wisdom. They even refer to him as his firstborn son, you see, and it starts to you understand now why those things come into focus in the life of Jesus. But anyway, so when it's talking about you didn't obey my voice, that's an active agent. It's the representative of God. And ironically, in modern 20th century, running into the 21st now, but people like Wittgenstein identified that language is always between people. It's never purely internal. It's quite complex kind of philosophically, but when you analyse it and work it all the way around, it's a transaction between two individuals. And so there's something about God that is kind of in his communication that's framed by the context he's talking to. And so when he says you didn't obey my voice, that voice which is the purely God side of the argument, but the message he brings also is constrained by the context, i.e. the individuals who are hearing it. And so what he drives at here in Jeremiah, which you see all the way through the Old Testament of God saying, I wasn't really interested in the things I said, is God communicates into a context, and that context adds boundaries around what the communication really means. So he gives them a message, and now the message becomes God. Okay, that's really what's going on here. And it's not that message is incorrect, but it has a context. The message was given to produce a form of behaviour that developed a culture, and a culture that would survive against impossible odds, where it was dispersed amongst the nations, generation after generation. But the things that God gave them, which include the sacrifices and offerings and the festivals and the feasts and how you eat and how you wash, made them a different people, separate people, a holy people. That's what holy means, you see. And that's made them survive all the way through. And so Jesus then comes along and he says, the law, if you try and teach people to not do the least of these things, that's a bad thing. And he said, but I came to fulfill it. So that message that God gave them, which includes the offerings, isn't yet finished, but it has been fulfilled. It's not being finished because the context it was given into and the reason for it is still maintaining the Jewish people. Who have a role to play right the way through until the ends of the age. So it's not gone away, but it's now being fulfilled and we step into something new. But because actually Jesus is the Word, he is the voice that produced that first message. And where the focus of Israel was always supposed to be was in that personhood of God as he identifies and relates to humanity. His voice, his word, his wisdom, the firstborn son, all of these Old Testament ideas which then become physical and real in Jesus. So you kind of get a bit of a feel of it. It's a really radical idea, but it's that thing of it's sometimes easier to kind of hook on what's being said as a static dead thing rather than stay focused on the one who brought the message in the first place. And we have this kind of weird thing where sometimes we think that everything that God says has to always be eternal, which would not allow him to talk to us, because the whole point of communication is to communicate with people who aren't eternal. So the words themselves, the ideas themselves, the burnt offerings and the sacrifices had a reason why God said them, but they're not somehow magical, and they're a perfect example of what holiness is. They were the means by which he spoke to a historic context and a given people and produced a culture and a mode of behaviour that kept them faithful. But so often they were faithful to the wrong thing. They were faithful to the message, not to the messenger. And the messenger really was God. So there we go. There's my radical thoughts this morning. Coffee's got a long history of supporting them. Let's keep fueling those brains. Oh, I've just had a new one. Anyway, till next time on Quick Coffee Moments, I will see you around.